I'm Andrea Butcher, and this is Being at Work. Being a leader is hard. So on this show, I set out to talk with experienced leaders to learn from their pivotal moments, how they led through the challenges we can all relate to but are often unheard. Today's episode highlights Dennis Martin, President, Individual Life and Financial Services at OneAmerica. Dennis is a visionary. Today, he's in the role that he set out to get 20 years ago. Throughout his career, he's been incredibly deliberate and intentional. So he was taken aback a bit when the moment arose to move into the role he's in today. He realized through candid feedback that he wasn't as ready as he thought. Dennis chose to lean into and embrace the feedback. His openness is so refreshing and inspiring. Listen in as he describes his journey and what he learned about himself when he chose to be vulnerable.
I came to OneAmerica 10 years ago to Indianapolis, which was a great move for me. It's been a fabulous move for my family, and the company has done great. It's been a great opportunity for me. And continue to expand my role and my knowledge and my experience as part of that, always with a goal to achieve and kind of sit in the seat that I'm in today. And, as we talked and I shared with you before, Andrea, despite all of that 20 years of preparation and charting and saying this is where I kind of know I want to get to, we had a change at OneAmerica in January of last year of 18 that was a little bit unexpected. And all of a sudden, the opportunity that I'd been sort of seeking and looking for my whole career was in my lap, in a sense, in terms of opportunity.
And you had not expected that?
Had not expected it at the time. And so certainly that has its own impact. When anything unexpected happens in organizations, that can be a challenge for everybody, but it's also then an opportunity in that situation. And what's really interesting, I always have a bit of Boy Scout in me of, it's out, always be prepared, or better to be prepared for opportunity, not have one. And yet, despite 20 years of what I thought was preparing, when the moment actually arrived, I wasn't as ready as I thought I was or would have liked to be in that moment, which was interesting. And most of the readiness for me was not so much on did I know enough about the business or to understand it and have the different dynamics in my head around how the business runs. It was much more about the leadership capacity, behaviors that were required. And so in January, I was put into the acting role in the job I'm in today. And we went through a process as a company, and we had interviews and executive analysis and all those things that they go through, including internal and external candidates. Mm-hmm. And so I also got a lot of feedback during that time. OneAmerica, we have a saying that, feedback is a gift.
Not always a gift you ask for.
And it felt like it was Christmas in February for me, in the sense of all of a sudden I got a lot of feedback. And it was extremely, humbling, but enlightening at the same time. So often when it comes to feedback, we're sort of naturally resistant to it because we're, to the extent it's constructive or critical, depending on how you receive it and how you choose to receive it, you tend to sometimes want to just brush it off and push it away because you don't want to show that weakness or vulnerability because you're trying to achieve or get ahead. And I think in so many ways, that vulnerability has been something that lots of us resist or think makes us look weak or whatever the terminology is. And so I just found during that time two things. One, the perception of me in a sort of leadership capacity was much different than I thought I was projecting, and got a lot of feedback in terms of style and perception in what people thought of me or how I would show up and behave every day and how they would see me as a leader in that context. And it was really, again, enlightening, humbling, and I just decided and chose to take it and be vulnerable with it and to see how I could adapt or think about showing up differently, literally starting from day one. Just kind of was almost an about shift from sort of being very conscious about how people are perceiving me, not just do I know, am I right, what's the course of action we should take, should I drive for that? I much more learned to soften around that and think about how do I help bring others in, help to get things done, even if I know what they are or think I know, what's the value of bringing others along, getting them in the mix and helping people see that side of me. And through that whole process, I had so much feedback of, how different I was, how I'm showing up differently. And yet I felt like I didn't change at all, other than slight course changes, behavioral shifts that had this massive impact on perception. And some of that is just because people see you willing to change and adapt. I think that was part of it, right? It doesn't take a lot sometimes for people to actually perceive that difference because it's the effort that people see and perceive that made all the differences. That's how I look back on it. In the moment, don't know if I could have articulated all of this, but it was just something that almost came natural. And I think part of that really was rooted in the fact that I really, really wanted the job. This is what I wanted. It was where I was headed. And so that kind of willingness to do what it takes, which sometimes is not manual effort and hard work and driving through stuff. It's actually slowing down, looking around, taking more people in, and kind of thinking about it. So I very much had been a driver type and trying to get things done. That was I often think of myself as a catalyst in a historical context. And a big part of that now is different in terms of how you show up and how you get things done. So that was kind of that journey. Hopefully that's making some sense to you. I feel like I'm reaching for words there, but it was a really interesting time. I think I probably had more development in 6 months than I probably had in the past 6 years.
How was that for you personally going through that 6-month process?
It was really energizing in a way. Once you kind of get over the fact that people are going to give you this constructive feedback and maybe the perception of you wasn't all you wanted it to be.
Yeah.
And you kind of learn.
So you're getting that feedback was built into the 6-month process?
Yeah, absolutely. Right at the beginning, I think in many ways, people felt, okay, we know you know the business, we know you know these things, and we know you have the relationships, but, do you have the leadership skills to really step up? And I think that was because people, I think, wanted that, and we're really focusing on having internal growth and development and promotion at OneAmerica. So obviously that's a big win when you can find somebody internally who understands your culture, understands your company, but they have to be able to step into the role and kind of take you where you need to go. So that was really what I needed to prove, I guess. But in a way, folks were cheering for me, so that always helped. And so I sort of accepted that at face value, that they were cheering and all the input was given to me as positive. They really were gifts, if you want to think of the earlier reference. And so I kind of just chose that and went after it. So, but it was, again, hard at first when you start saying, hold on, because you kind of punish yourself for all the stuff you thought you should have done better in the past. But rather than do that, just say, here's where I am today, and let's go forward with this.
Give us an example. What were a couple of the areas of improvement?
Probably listening. One of the biggest feedback points, as a sort of technical expert, I think I see, or I hope I do see, solutions pretty quickly. And sometimes I'll just drive through that and jump through different aspects of it. And so sometimes that drive tends to me to push through things and not listen as much from others and kind of take in additional viewpoints and things like that. Then that can be helpful. And even to the, even if the right answer is no one up front, allowing folks to come in and participate and not, sort of jumping in or cutting off with that eager kind of achievement, let's just get going attitude. I think just the whole point of how do you approach things and just behavior. So you need to get the same outcomes and you need to achieve them in a different way as a leader because you can't do them yourself. You have to think about how to bring people in. So really listening is something I've been getting feedback on for a lot of my career. Hey, be patient, go through. And I think expertise can be a barrier to that if you think and you got to learn to listen and appreciate the perspectives others bring because everyone has blind spots, right? Nobody has seen it all in that context. So that was really helpful for me in that point. So that's probably the most is just listen and don't talk over people. Make sure you invite them in and kind of have that relationship. And I also think that there was a perception that was very much of a rigidity. I had a belief and I was a certain kind of person. And that was just based on exposure. People hadn't seen enough of me to understand how I would behave or adapt or shift and be open to feedback and actually incorporate it and go forward. And that was on me because I didn't build those relationships before this opportunity. And so I shared with you earlier, I kind of thought this was a path I was on, but I might have another two or 3 years before I would get there. And in any situation, it's better to have relationships before you need them. And this is a case where I just hadn't done the work. Meeting with the people and having lunch or doing those things in advance. And, relationships are one of those things you have to work on. And it doesn't always take much, but it does take something. Folks only had experience with me in meetings or certain instances and not in different settings. And so I think that was part of it is just more exposure and letting people see who you are and how that works. That was another, I don't know if that was a shift for me, but I do think it was very intentional that I sort of looked for moments or created moments where I thought people could see or experience that, not because it was artificial, but because that's sort of natural for me in terms of trying to understand how to engage with people.
Well, and that's an interesting point because you said earlier these weren't like major changes for you; they were tweaks. So in some ways, it sounds like, Dennis, even getting back to more of who you are naturally.
Very much. I think that, I'm not sure I would have said this, but in some ways, I've always been, in a fairly strong advisory capacity in every role I've been in. So I was, a number two kind of person to the leader on a business and strategy side. That's always been kind of where I found myself, probably going back 15 years. And that has its, good things, and you get to be involved in a lot of things, but you're always trying to help others convince and see what they want to do. As a leader, I found very much all of a sudden that's not there. I can have more influence and direction very clearly or easily on where we should go. Still have to bring others with me and help them along and get it affirmed. But that part, this became more natural for me to kind of be there because I have a good sense and feeling on the business side. But so it was almost getting back to just who I was and remembering that, as opposed to trying to navigate the politics and all those kinds of things, which are kind of in every organization. And I think that's one thing as a leader I'm really striving to try to move aside a bit. There's always going to be some level of politics if you want to think about it, but we've been very focused as a leadership group at OneAmerica and to try to minimize those aspects of it and create just good dialogue, the right degree of transparency. Obviously confidentiality and those kind of things is important when you're at high levels. But there are certain things that are just better. Let's get them on the table. Let's talk through things as opposed to let them kind of fester and go untalked about. So just like in any relationship, if you don't talk about things, they don't get better, they get worse. So I think those are efforts, but some of that was just very natural. I'm not really one to like unresolved conflict. I like to have things settled either way. And so it was very much natural, I think, in ways that I maybe didn't expect. Certainly, it felt natural from the beginning. I don't want to say it was easier, but it was different for sure than where I'd been and maybe what I expected.
So fast forward a year, I'm curious to hear about the impact that's had on your relationships and your team.
First of all, having been there for 10 years, I was really part of a really strong team. So I had a great team.
And you knew them well.
And I knew them well, and they knew me well. And so that helps because you really have a strong trust in who they are and what their intent is and all those kinds of things. So there was no that kind of warming up period of, who is Dennis and what do I think of him? We had a pretty solid foundation to build on. That was true across my whole team. The challenge then, of course, is I go from being a teammate to a leader. And so that requires some transition on a couple of fronts. Obviously, one part is me having to do less and influence more. In fact, I have sort of adopted for a saying for myself, if I'm doing something, I'm not doing my job. In a sense, it's probably a little bit extreme, but it helps me kind of think about it. But then also having been that person who was sort of a number two and in the middle of a lot of things and really responsible for a lot of triangulating and strategy development across different things and bringing some of the different challenges together and finding solutions, I had to sort of learn how to step away and challenge others to do that and let them do that. I think that was one of the hardest things is, and I think probably for the first few months, at least, and it probably still happens today, the temptation to drop down and solution and try to help everyone and solve it for them is still high for me because that's sort of where I cut my teeth in the business, and it was one of the things that gave me a lot of advantages. But as I get more experience in that, I see the power of inquiry, asking, looking to them, expecting them to have the answers. I think that's a term I've used for myself. That power of inquiry as a leader is really high, as opposed to telling. Asking is pretty powerful because that gives people that opening to say what they think. Even if you want to tell, I think resisting that's important. See that work.
Well, and that goes hand in hand then with your listening.
Yeah.
Right. So you're naturally asking more questions to enable others to come up with solutions. Yeah. It's all connected, isn't it?
It's all connected. I think the other part, my relationships at my peer level now with my other senior leadership is continuing to grow and evolve. And I think that trust, number one, seeing the responsiveness in the first 6 months was what people wanted to see to get started. But continuing that has been something that we've really focused on too. It's great. In that time frame, everybody was, looking for this all to come through a certain way, and we're kind of pulling towards that. But as you get back into more of a, I'll call settled state, the realities and challenges of your business, the conflicts that emerge on resources and different things always come back, right? That's the reality of business. And so we've been very conscious as a group to really try to keep the relationship strong around that and not let some of the temptations that creep in on those things, that we stay as a cohesive as a group, that we really look at all the facts on the table, we put things out there and don't create, alliances and those kind of things, because that's really important. And that's important not just for us, but, I'm a firm believer that everything starts at the top. And if we don't model it and do it, then we should have no expectation that others will do so. It's you can't say do as I say, not as I do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You have to kind of embody that and lead that way. We're fortunate to have good leadership on that front, and a good group, I think, who kind of all is on the same page there. And we're all relatively new leaders now. I think we have in our senior leadership group of 8, we have, I think, 5 or 6 that are newer to the company and new to this role and this level at the same time. So a lot of sort of, seems cliche, but next generation type leaders, probably mostly Gen X, which is a bit of a, I think I may have shared with you when we met, that's sort of a transition that you can observe, I think, going on in a lot of corporate America, is that sort of generational shift from baby boom to Gen X. And that has yet to be seen implications, but I think people do think a bit differently in that regard, and certainly have different experiences and perspectives to bring to the job.
Well, and certainly the kind of we're in this together attitude then, since you're all experiencing that transition as a team.
Yeah, I think that's pretty powerful. We're all sort of feeling our way through at the same time, and probably makes you more apt to be able to, lend a hand or throw a rope when you think people need it, because you never know when you're going to need one in that context.
And give grace, since
Absolutely.
You're learning
grace
together.
Grace is a really good word. I like that.
So I want to go back to something you said at the beginning that has really struck me. You said that you set out to get the job that you're in today 20 years ago. So clearly you're a visionary in a lot of ways. I just would love to learn more about that. Is it the kind of work you're doing? Is it leading a big organization? Like, what do you mean by you set out to get the kind of job you're in today?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've tried to articulate it before, but so I gave my background earlier. I started off as an actuary in the insurance side, which is a very technical role, and it's a very important role in the business, but it typically has been more of a technician or technical side of that. And early on in my career, I'm a fairly social person, like to be involved in things, played a lot of college sports. Just sort of had this opportunity to go into sort of marketing and sales role, working with folks in our distribution, kind of seeing what it is that we do as a business, not just measuring it or looking at the financials or those parts of it. And for me, that was engaging right from the beginning. So that opportunity came to me in 1997. And right away, I knew that I wanted to take all that I knew about how the business worked and the financials. And I had spent a lot of time trying to learn that. I say curiosity is probably one of my traits, and it's something I actually recruit to. I think people who are curious and passionate are always going to be successful somehow, somewhere. So I had spent a lot of time learning kind of the knee bone connected to the thigh bone, so to speak, in an insurance context, but really hadn't spent much time understanding the business that we were in, how we generate revenue, sort of the efforts that go in on the field, how we reach people in their homes or over the kitchen table back then, and certainly it's evolved over time. But for me, that just seeing the breadth of that just engaged me. How does all this stuff work together? And rather than be a really great actuary, and which I probably could have done some things there, I really decided I wanted to try to blend all that together and really kind of see. So it was really an intellectual, I think, desire to a certain extent, but also just the affinity of working with the people and the sales teams and across the different folks, and getting just that kind of interaction was really just compelling for me. And just in terms of it was a good mix of who I am naturally and what engages me intellectually. It's probably, and then just, without necessarily having a destination in mind, knowing that this comes from just my raw upbringing, just achievement oriented, work ethic, and never knew how high I would go, but just knew I always had to do the best I could, whatever that meant. And that was where I say the steps I took, I think, were deliberate, intentional, that I felt they still continued to feed that mix of technical acumen and business growth and exposure and development, without knowing exactly how far that would take me. But it was those, I don't know if that helped, but that's kind of how I sort of got on that path. And it's just been, if you don't know much about our industry, it's very rewarding for many, many people who do well. And it's very rewarding to see the people that we help along the way and the tragedies that we sort of help soften at a minimum, right? When bad things happen to people, we're the ones bringing checks to help people in that context. So that little kind of social side of it too, and the value bring was pretty powerful for me because I do like to help people in that context. So it was more than just math and being smart and making money. It was kind of bringing all those things together was part of it.
So I hear like good collection of a lot of strengths, natural strengths, and very purposeful work as well.
Yeah.
So if you could go back to Dennis Martin 20 years ago and give him any advice, what advice would you give?
That's a good question. I would probably tell myself to really take the feedback a lot more seriously. That's just older self to younger self. And probably we're all that way. In our 20s, we're invincible and, we're all world beaters and we know what we're going to do. But for me, that sort of, and I still have to work on this today, by the way, so by no means am I mastered any of these things. But that power of listening and learning and just being more attentive to people, it has the potential to help you in just every aspect of your life, not just your career, but it helps you obviously with your spouse, but with your kids too, learning to listen, not tell, and with your relationships. For me, it's just something that when I get in that moment and make sure I'm conscious and listening more. And I do have a little thing in my notebook that says listen, learn, and think before you speak. I try to keep some cues in front of me. Talk about having a little note card in my folio that I carry around that says listen, learn, and think, then speak, and always ask first. So I've kind of added on to that over time in terms of ways I think are powerful because it's important, I think, to put cues in your visual space or to prod yourself because we all have strong muscle memory and we regress to our default styles or behaviors really quickly if we don't kind of work on that consciously. So little things like that, I'm sure, you can lots of ways to do it, but for me, that's something I just try to do. And in the moment, I can look back and think, oh, I didn't do that. Well, okay, I'm not perfect, but you kind of recall that self and how you do those things. So for me, that's something I try to work on all the time. Listening, so tell my old self, really try to listen more and think about the development side. I think technical development is something we can all latch on to quickly because number one, it's self-driven. You can do it yourself. You can take care of it. But leadership skills and behaviors, you can't learn those yourself. You have to be interacting with people and get feedback and have experiences and provide experiences, right? People generate their beliefs about you based on their experience with you, not based on what you intended it to be, but what they perceive it to be. So you have to really be conscious of that. And I've been fortunate in my career to have worked with a lot of different types. I started off in a technical field, but then worked a lot with more salespeople and marketing people for early on in my career, which really gave me some great opportunities and had some great mentors who really got me to think outside of can't analyze people's behavior. You have to kind of feel kind of in the gut kind of thing and kind of work through some of that too. So.
Yeah, I think that this is so relatable, what you're sharing today. That there are two specific things that I'm taking away from our conversation, Dennis. The first is just your choice to be vulnerable. So you have this vision. This is the role, the kind of work I want to be doing. You get to a place where that becomes an opportunity that's right in front of you, and you chose to be vulnerable. And you said, I wasn't quite prepared for it.
Right.
So you leaned into that. Well, I'm going to have to learn here in this moment how to be better.
Yeah.
So choosing to be vulnerable and then taking really seriously the feedback that you've gotten. The power of listening and learning, and you've built reminders for yourself, and clearly it's having impact on the work that you're doing and the relationships that you have, not just at work, but at home as well.
Sure. Yeah. I think, I've learned, my daughters are in college, but you probably learned as much about being a leader and a manager by raising kids and the things that, are all kind of basic and they kind of tell it like it is. And so I think there's a lot of things that are parallel for sure. And it's helped me in a lot of ways in that regard too. You can't, especially as they get to the age they're at, you can't oversteer, right? You just have to kind of work along. And I still do my dad advice and tell my dad jokes, but you have to kind of let them find their way, and they do.
Well, and I constantly, as a mom, reminding myself, my role is to model the way. So am I leading the life that I want her to live?
Right.
So as we conclude, Dennis, thank you so much for being a part of Being at Work. If our listeners want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
You can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm out there. That's easy enough. You can find me on there, or you can send me an email. Dennis.Martin at OneAmerica.com. Happy to hear from you and share anecdotes and ways to get better.
Great.
Awesome.
What is it? Listen, learn, and think.
Yeah, before you speak.
Okay, there you go. We'll leave it at that. Thanks, Dennis.
All right. Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. Please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast to never miss a Being at Work story.